time.
Yeah, we are in the 12th chapter of Proverbs today, and right out of the gate, we start with a very proverbial kind of thought. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge, but those who hate to be rebuked are stupid or foolish. And Michael, discipline's an interesting word, not a word,
Yep.
not a real. Well, that's not accurate. In some ways, discipline is a very American word, but in some ways, it's a word not entirely embraced by our culture that loves spontaneity and personal freedom and the ability to do what I want. The idea of being disciplined, of kind of grinding out the things that need done, of doing what you need to do before you do what you want to do. I think discipline is not an easy sell in our day and age in some ways.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because it connects to a part of our lived existence that we don't necessarily always till or we don't give attention to. The word I'm looking at here can be glossed in different ways. It's a discipline of the moral nature or chastening or correction. And, morality, the idea of character and morality is in some ways an old-fashioned vocabulary. It shouldn't be old-fashioned as an idea, but I think it's not common in our public discourse to talk about what is moral, what is right. We have differing ways that we approach that, I think. And as we come to the text of Scripture, this idea of loving discipline isn't about loving abuse, though at times discipline has become that. It's not about loving some sort of masochistic loving of feeling bad. That's not what it's about. It's about when we can have the weeds of human sinfulness either plucked or hedged, when we can have an opportunity to learn and to grow and to do better. And lots of times I think we have a very unhealthy relationship with discipline. Discipline is, in a scriptural sense, a good thing, because if you're going in the wrong direction, it's good to have someone get you back on the right road. But we have in many ways become cautious of it or become afraid of it, or we've seen it abused. And so I think maybe we've thrown out the baby with the bathwater a little bit.
Yeah, and I would guess we all hate to be rebuked, except in the sense that it helps us do better, that we would perhaps, if we were wise, want to know where we're getting it wrong so that we could get it right. And, there are lots of ways to be rebuked. Rebuked is a strange word to us. Correction is maybe a better way to think about that in our language. But a good parable right off the bat. I'd also point out verse 6. These parables about wives Proverbs about wives in the book of Proverbs are never as nice as I wish they were. But a good wife is the crown of her husband, but she who brings shame is like a rottenness in his bones. Now, undoubtedly, that's one-sided. We wish it was maybe more nuanced, maybe more fair, more balanced. But there is wisdom in this, in the idea that you're talking to a young man and trying to convince him that the choice of a mate will be a fundamental and foundational choice in his life. The same would be true for a young woman. The same would be true for either partner. I have a wedding coming up next weekend, and just always feel unqualified to try and communicate to a young couple what they're doing in those moments that they partner and pair their lives together, because none of us know what we're getting into. None of us understand the depth and the breadth of that, the impact of that on our life. And so this is, as a guy who lucked out and has a good wife, the crown of her husband. It's not the way I'd say it, but I would say to any young man, if you want your life to go well, then marrying well and having a good partner is absolutely essential. And trust me, as a dad of 2 daughters, I would say the same thing to them and have.
Yeah, you struggle in the midst of counseling with young couples. I think, at least this has been my experience. It's a struggle to help people see some of the pitfalls ahead on a journey that they can't imagine, right? There's a moment early in the relationship where your love is true and sincere. I don't in any way doubt that, but it's not the kind of love that's been tested and been formed and been fashioned in the difficulties of living and finding a way even in the midst of differences. So couples, when you talk about, hey, when you fight, you can see in the couple's eye, oh yeah, I like that time that we fought the other day. And you think, no, not like that one, like this thing you don't know yet that's coming. Like, believe me, it's there, right? And you try to sort of paint that picture. But I do think what is helpful is to recognize it's the goodness, I think, is the commitment. And the proverb doesn't say that, I'm inserting it. But I think couples that are able to commit in principle, not just sort of by feeling, that is the way in which you can find that sort of dance together that stands the test of time.
Yeah, I'm going to throw my family under the bus here, but Jane and Emma, the last couple weeks, I think Emma got Jane pulled into it. They're reality TV fans. I am not a reality TV fan. And they've been watching this show called Love at First Sight or Married at First Sight. Yeah, you can't believe this TV show exists. They take people who've not met each other and they sort of pair them off in this formula, and then they have 2 weeks or 3 weeks. They basically kind of live together, and then they decide if they're going to get married. And they say these ridiculously stupid things like, well, I just want somebody who understands me. And yeah, well, of course. Why couldn't you have that in 2 weeks? And you think, oh, well, that's what they're trying to teach, is that physical. But no, all these people are drop dead gorgeous, and they're all very shallow and stupid and want to be on TV. And if you're a fan of the show, you might be catching
what a
on
walking advertisement here.
That I'm not a fan of the show. And it's just the idea that you could go on TV and in a couple of weeks with someone you've never met before decide, oh, you know what? This is the right person for me. And yeah, I know there are stories like that have worked out, and good for them. But it drives me crazy. Sorry that you all had to listen to that.
I would only conclude, I do think, though, this idea of the rottenness in the bones, a kind of fundamental piece of the relationship that is skewed. I think that's not just for our partners, though. That's where we see it most clearly. I think when we don't do the work that it takes to be community, and I'm even going to bring this out to church, when we don't fundamentally care for one another in meaningful ways, the bones do start to rot. And there comes a day when it appears like suddenly it all snaps and it breaks. But it wasn't that one day. It takes time for relationships to break down. So I think for all of us, it's a clarion call. Do the hard work of loving, caring, being patient, fruits of the Spirit. That stuff matters because that's what keeps the bones strong.
Very good. Then we'll move on. Sorry about ranting there. We will move on to verse 15, one of my very favorites. I suspect all of us have maybe bumped into this one at some point in the last few months. Fools think their own way is right, but the wise listen to advice. As we've been in this time of sort of increased social media, and the sounding chamber has been smaller for many of us, or maybe it's harder to get away from some of the discussions. This seems to me to be so apropos of this moment. Fools think their own way is right. In other words, fools have their mind made up and nothing else, no other evidence, opinion, or information can get to them. But the wise listen to advice. It's interesting, Michael, to think that the fundamental difference at any moment between being a wise person and being a fool is whether or not you're willing and able to listen. And when we are unwilling to listen, we very much increase the risk that we are acting foolish. To listen doesn't mean to agree, but when we shut off our ears and we refuse to allow some other piece of information to be considered, we are not acting as a wise person.
Clint, I have never heard someone describe themselves in the first person as a fool. A fool has always been reserved for the other, right? They're a fool because no one wants to think that you're foolish, or you would change your mind, right? You would think differently if you thought you were a fool. This is what's key, I think, is that we must always entertain the possibility that if we rush to words and fail to listen, that we are being foolish. And that is the heart. That requires humility. That requires self-awareness. It requires restraint. But I think what's interesting here is, once again, it's another reversal. Those who think their own way is right, you would think the opposite would be that they think that other people's way is right. No, it doesn't mean that you just wholesale adopt what other people think. It means that we must listen to those around us, listen to advice. And quite frankly, I'm sure the author here would encourage us to listen to those who have wisdom, a track record of wisdom. But friends, that old adage, right? You have one mouth and two ears, and we should live our life in proportion to that. I think that rings true here.
Yeah, very much. And I think that's one of my favorite Proverbs. Right below it, again, these aren't written in an era of social media, but they certainly apply. Fools show their anger at once, but the prudent ignore an insult. That wise people have a patience, have a longer fuse than foolish people. That when we jump to anger as our first response, we are likely being unwise. We are likely being foolish. And I think, again, this is a good word for our day that feels like it has a lot of anger and hair triggers to go with it.
Yeah, it seems striking to me. This is maybe not something that's in everyone's life experience, but as a younger person, it is in the millennials' vocabulary, the word being a troll. Have you ever heard someone say they're being a troll? Like, there's literally an online word for someone who goes and shows anger to everyone they encounter online. Like, that's a thing. And I think that we culturally bear some of the weight of that, this idea that it's acceptable to go and a troll flames, to use the language, that they got flamed, that they go and flame other people. And that is the definition of foolishness, and it is far too culturally appropriate in our current moment to do it. So
yeah, I'm not a big social media guy, but one of the things that just absolutely amazes me is that, so for instance, during this pandemic, there's been a family, I've watched some of their YouTube videos. It's a dad, mom's some kind of creative person, dad's a musician. They've got 3 kids. The 2 boys play between them guitar, bass guitar, drums, harmonica. Dad plays instruments and sings. And then they have a girl, she's probably 6 or 7. She jumps around, dances, sometimes she sings. It is truly awesome. I think they're called the Colt family, if you want to find them on YouTube. And every day they homeschool their kids, and as part of that education, they learn a song a day, and it's old music, most of it. And so it's just incredible. It's awesome. These kids are so talented, and without exception, you look and it's 500 likes and 25 dislikes, and you think, who thought they needed to take the time to vote down this little girl and her brothers playing music with their dad? It's insane. You know, you could put up a picture of the cutest kitten in the world and somebody's going to say something horrid about it. It is very frustrating that that's the age we live in, and it's very tempting to bring ourselves down to that level and begin throwing stones with the rest of the crowd. And I think here this is wise. You know, verse 18, rash words are like sword thrusts, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. To measure our words, to ask whether they are doing damage or whether they are doing good. Are they bringing harm or are they bringing healing? And harm and healing, that's a good sermon title, Michael.
I would probably point us to verse 25. Anxiety weighs down the human heart, but a good word cheers it up. And I have a shorter time frame to look at, Clint, than you do. But I'm not sure I've known a time in my own lifetime where anxiety has been so pervasive and universal.
Yeah. It certainly is an anxious moment for many people. And I think there are two things I love about this proverb, Michael. The first is the word weigh, because I think that's what it feels like when you're encased with worry, whether it be a bad report on health, something that you have to overcome, when you're worried about something for someone else. That's the exact right word. There's a heaviness to that that's hard to get away from, like being draped with a very heavy coat or blanket and just feeling weighed down, that the heart feels the weight of that. And I think that's the exact right way to describe that experience. But a good word cheers it up. And one of the things I love about this is it doesn't say whether the good word is spoken or heard. I think it's fun to imagine that it's both, that in the midst of our anxiety, speaking a good word can lighten our burden. Certainly in the midst of someone else's anxiety, our speaking encouragement to them may do the same. But I think I love that this is open-ended, because I think it encourages us to do both things, to, when we are in moments of anxiety, perhaps fight back a little bit by saying good things and focusing on others. And this idea, trying to use our words to bring healing to others, simultaneously may have a healing benefit to ourselves as well.
Yeah, I think many people struggle in the midst of the moment to be able to see what the good word is. And I think that the principles of faith have always existed for moments such as that. I think we're told time and time again of the importance of slowing down, of praying, of engaging meaningfully in the world around us. And, I think the temptation is to fill our lives with stuff that distracts us. In moments of anxiety, it feels good to sit on the couch, turn on this show, and eat ice cream. But that's not what's good for your soul. I mean, that's what rots the bones. And there's something significant about taking time, carving time, in which you aren't running from the thing that's making you anxious, but you can face it. And you can face it with the courage of the living Christ who's in you by the power of the Spirit, and to know that living one is able to do more for you than you could possibly ask or imagine. And these aren't just platitudes. These aren't just, oh, that would be a nice thing to do. It's a challenge. If we were to be able to slow down and listen to advice instead of quick to respond with anger, all of these threads come together. And I think anxiety is a state that we often feel trapped in because we don't feel like we have agency. But you can do something, not just by your own strength, but by the one who lives in you.
Yeah, in the interest of clarity, we want to make sure we have no problem with sitting on the couch eating ice cream.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying that's not a fun thing.
No, when we avoid that's the danger of anxiety, right? When we are feeling overwhelmed, when we feel heavy, we disconnect. And whenever we disconnect, in the language of the book of Proverbs, we are leaving the path of life and we are moving to the path of self, which is foolishness. And anxiety paves that wrong road for us very well, because it automatically focuses us on ourselves, and not only that, but on a certain negativity that goes with it, on fear, on worry, on those negative emotions and feelings, and those aren't life-giving. And so, again, to push back, the book of Proverbs is going to point us toward things like gratitude and joy and encouraging or blessing others. And I think for an ancient book, in some ways, it's remarkably modern in those senses.
Yeah, I think only one last word of clarification from me, and that is, there's a difference between anxiety and depression.
Sure.
And if you're in that place, you do not need someone to tell you. You need permission to reach out and ask for help, whether that's contacting us at the church, whether that's contacting a counselor or a mental health professional. I mean, there's one thing to say that you have agency. It's another thing to say that you might need help. And if that's where you're at, there's no shame in asking for it. There are many people in that position right now. And just so that you know, the love of Christ is with us, but that doesn't mean that sometimes we don't have others who should walk alongside us on the journey.
Yeah, and what does the best counselor do? They listen and they offer wise advice. I mean, it's pretty much in there. So anyway, thanks for being with us today. Hope you guys have a great weekend. If it works for you and you're comfortable, hope to see you Sunday evening out at the football field. If not, we understand it will be live streamed. Catch it on whatever device you watch church on, and we're grateful that you were with us this afternoon.
Take care, everybody. Thank you for spending time with us today as we study Scripture together. If you haven't already, we would invite you to follow us on Facebook or subscribe on YouTube. It's a great way to get notified when these studies happen every day at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. Of course, if you've already done that, we would love for you to be able to give the video a like, to share it if you're on Facebook. This is a great way for other people to find the Bible study and be able to join us in this time studying Scripture. If this is your first time here, welcome. It's such a joy to have you be with us this day, and we would love to get to know you better. We would love if you wouldn't mind just taking a minute to go to our website, fpcspiritlake.org/welcome. We'd love to get your name and email address, and we'll follow up with you personally to thank you for spending time with us this day. And for each and every person that is able to study Scripture and engage in this conversation, we want to say thank you. We look forward to our next time with you every weekday at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time. And until then, God bless.